The binary stars of Keshan Prime hung low over the scarred landscape, casting everything in shades of crimson and gold. Lieutenant James Holloway moved through the wreckage methodically, his combat suit hissing with each careful step across the radioactive debris field. The invasion had lasted 3 days. His platoon had lasted 3 hours. That's when he saw her. Trapped beneath a section of hull plating, an alien scout writhed in agony. Her species, the Vextheri, were known for their crystalline exoskeletons that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns. This one's patterns were fading, flickering like a dying star. Her breathing came in shallow, desperate rasps through respiratory vents along her neck. James's hand instinctively moved to his weapon. "Please," she gasped in heavily accented English. Her large eyes, luminous violet, locked onto his with unmistakable terror. "Shoot? No. Before you capture me." He froze. In his intelligence briefing, they'd explained that the Vextheri believed capture meant eternal suffering. Suicide was honored. Surrender was shame. But James saw something else. He saw a soldier as trapped and desperate as he was. He lowered his weapon. Back at the human settlement 6 kilometers away, Lieutenant Commander Victoria Chen was reviewing tactical reports when her personal communications device buzzed. A secure message from Earth, encrypted, urgent, marked with a red flag. "Commander Chen, we need to discuss your personal security clearance. A matter has come to our attention regarding sensitive files accessed from your private terminal. Call us immediately. Director Morrison." Victoria's stomach clenched. She knew exactly what files they were referring to. The ones her wife, Dr. Ava Reeves, had been accessing from her government position in bioweapons research. The ones that had gradually begun discussing Vextheri physiology as a vulnerability to be exploited. Ava had been distant lately, working late, coming to bed cold and silent, her body angled away from Victoria's reaching hands. When had her brilliant, passionate wife transformed into this careful stranger? Victoria pulled up the security logs on her encrypted tablet. Ava had accessed the files yesterday, and the day before, and dozens of times in the past month. The timestamps corresponded with her absence from their quarters, and worse, with encrypted messages to a sender identified only as Command Hawk. A lover. It had to be. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. James worked with single-minded focus. Using his field knife, he pried and leveraged the whole plating, inch by tortuous inch. The alien female, she'd whispered her name was Kelly, couldn't help him. Her lower left arm was clearly broken, and her breathing had become more labored. "Why?" she asked, watching his hands work. "Why not? Finish it." "Because you don't deserve to die," James said simply, finally freeing the metal. "And because humanity isn't what you think we are." He found his emergency medkit, precious, irreplaceable, and began tending to her wounds. The crystalline structure of her exoskeleton was fractured in 3 places, leaking a luminescent fluid that served as her blood. He applied pressure with sterile gauze, watching as her bioluminescence dimmed further. "This will hurt," he warned before splinting her broken arm with strips of his own uniform. She didn't cry out, but she did something unexpected. Her uninjured hand reached out and gripped his wrist with surprising gentleness. "What is your designation?" she asked. "James. James Holloway. James." She repeated it like a prayer. "I am Kali of the Illuminated Collective. By your mercy, I am in your debt." The radiation readings on his suit were climbing. The medkit couldn't handle her Vextheri physiology completely, but he had one more option. Slowly, carefully, he removed his oxygen mask and pressed it against her respiratory vents, allowing her to breathe filtered air meant for human lungs. "We need to move," he said, his own breathing becoming harder. "Can you stand?" She tried, and he caught her as her crystalline legs buckled. Supporting her weight, he began walking toward the distant outline of the human outpost, each step carrying them deeper into the radioactive haze. Behind them, the battlefield burned with indifferent flames. The outpost's medical bay was state-of-the-art, designed for human physiology and wholly inadequate for a Vextheri. But James refused to leave Kelly aside as the medical team worked frantically, improvising treatments and monitoring her failing systems. 26 hours into her recovery, she opened her eyes and found his face the first thing she focused on. "You stayed," she said, wonder in her fractured English. "Of course I stayed." He was sitting in a biocontainment chair beside her medical pod, his own radiation sickness slowly responding to treatment. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. A week's worth of stubble covered his jaw. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the battlefield. Your command has segregated me, Kalai observed, her violet gaze tracking the transparent barriers that isolated her pod. They fear me. They don't understand you yet. James reached out and placed his palm against the barrier between them. After a moment, Kalai extended her undamaged arm and mirrored the gesture, the crystalline surface of her hand catching the medical bay's sterile light. But I do. A little. Why? She asked. Our people are at war. Your commander speaks of strategic advantage, of eliminating Vex theory infiltration vectors. I heard them. The walls here are thin. James didn't answer immediately. He was thinking of Victoria, of the way she looked at him last week when he'd returned from reconnaissance, with pride in her eyes and something else underneath. Something unguarded. He was thinking of how he'd held his wife that same night, after a tactical briefing. How she'd wept silently against his chest, her hands gripping his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear. Because the war isn't the real story, James finally said. The real story is that we choose how to treat each other when no one's watching. When we have nothing to gain. Victoria found Ava in their quarters, packing a small bag with methodical precision. Clothes, toiletries, nothing sentimental. So you're just leaving. Victoria's voice came out harder than she intended. Ava's hand stilled. When she turned, her eyes were red from crying or from stress. Victoria couldn't tell. They'd been together for 8 years, married for 4. And somehow Victoria realized she'd stopped knowing the answer to simple questions about this woman. I can explain. Don't. Victoria held up a hand. I don't want explanations about Commander Hawk or whatever this is. I want to understand how you look me in the eye every morning and then went to work developing weaponized pathogens against an entire species. It's not weaponized, Ava said quietly. Not yet. That's the point. They're targeting the Vex theory's respiratory system, looking for vulnerabilities. Oh, well, that makes it perfectly ethical then. The sarcasm hung between them like poison. Ava's face crumpled. I don't expect you to understand. Command approached me 6 months ago. They said the Vex theory were planning a full-scale assault on Earth, that we needed defensive measures. And Commander Hawk? What does he provide that I don't? The question emerged before Victoria could stop it, raw and aching. Ava stepped closer. He provides clarity. You're so full of doubt. So trapped between loyalty to your country and loyalty to your conscience. It was suffocating to watch. Victoria felt the words like a physical blow. Because Ava was right. Because the war, the choices, the impossible morality of it all had driven a wedge between them that neither had acknowledged until now. I should have tried harder, Victoria whispered. So should I. Ava's voice broke. But I didn't. I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm so sorry. She finished packing and walked out without looking back. Victoria stood alone in their quarters, surrounded by evidence of a life she no longer recognized as hers. Kalias' recovery accelerated once James convinced the medical team to allow her access to Vex theory-compatible fluids. Within a week, she could sit up. Within 2, she could walk, though carefully, her crystalline arm still healing through a process that bore more resemblance to growing than mending. During those long recovery days, James shared stories of Earth, of blue oceans and green forests, of music and food and the simple joy of watching a sunset without combat drugs numbing his perception. And Kalai, in turn, shared the history of the Vex theory, a species that had known only war for 500 years, a culture where mercy was considered a disease and compassion a weakness. Your lieutenant commander came to see you, Kalai mentioned one evening as they sat together in the observation garden, a small area of the outpost where they could be alone. Victoria Chin. She looks at me with hatred in her eyes. Victoria's dealing with a lot right now, James said carefully. Yes, I can see this. Clea's bioluminescence was steady now, a soft lavender that pulsed with the rhythm of her healing. It reminds me of patterns my people recognize. The breaking of a bonded pair. James's throat tightened. He hadn't realized the pain was so visible. Without overthinking it, he reached for Kalia's hand. Her skin was cool and smooth, almost like touching polished glass, but warm underneath with the evidence of her internal light. Is this acceptable? He asked. In my culture, physical contact between different social castes is forbidden, Kalai said softly. But I believe I would prefer to risk contamination by your touch than to never feel it again. She turned her palm upward and interlaced her fingers with his, a gesture so inherently human and vulnerable that it broke something open in his chest. He kissed her then, gently, carefully, his lips against the crystalline ridge that served as her mouth. It tasted like nothing he'd ever encountered, mineral and light and something indefinably other. But underneath the alien unfamiliarity, it felt like coming home. Commander Victoria Chin requested a personal meeting with James 3 days later. He arrived at her office to find her looking worse than he'd ever seen her. Thinner, her uniform immaculate, but her eyes hollow with lack of sleep. "I need you to authorize something," she said without preamble. "And I need you not to ask questions." James sat slowly. "What?" "A biological sample from the alien." "From KLI?" Victoria's jaw tightened on the name. "Medical analysis, nothing invasive. It's routine protocol." Alarm bells screamed in James's head. He thought of Ava's research, the weaponization programs, the quiet conversations he'd overheard about strategic opportunities now that they had a Vex theory in custody. "No," he said flatly. Victoria's eyes widened. "That wasn't a request, Lieutenant. That was a direct order." "Then I'm refusing that order." "Sir." James stood. "Kelly is under my protection. That's the agreement I made when I brought her here. You brought her here as a prisoner of war, not as your—" Victoria's voice cracked. She didn't finish the sentence. "As my what?" James challenged. "Go ahead. Say it. As your lover." The words exploded from her like they'd been locked inside for too long. "I saw the security footage from the observation garden. I saw you touch her. I saw." She turned away, unable to continue. James watched his commanding officer, a woman he'd served under for 3 years, a woman he respected, fall apart in front of him. "This is about Ava," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Victoria's shoulders trembled. After a long moment, she turned back. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "Ava's been reassigned. Transferred to the bioweapons lab in the Cheyenne Mountains. She's developing a pathogen, a targeted virus that affects the Vextheri respiratory system. Lethal in 97% of cases. They're calling it Operation Illumination Collapse." Victoria sat down heavily. "And I approved it. I authorized the research based on threat assessments that I now believe were manufactured." James felt the room tilt slightly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm in love with my wife, and I watch her destroy herself trying to be something she's not. Because every choice I've made in the last 6 months has been calculated to hurt her, thinking she'd already hurt me. And because—" Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper, "because watching you save that alien, watching you choose mercy over military advantage, it made me realize we're on the wrong side of this." She stood and accessed her secure terminal. Files began transferring to a secure drive. "This is everything. Ava's research. The directive from command. Recommendations for accelerated deployment. If the Vextheri Empire finds out humans are developing a species-targeted bioweapon, there's nothing that will stop them from launching a full-scale genocide campaign." "You're committing treason," James said. "I know." Victoria looked at him with clarity he hadn't seen in weeks. "But I'm a better person than that now. Because you showed me how. You and Kelly both." Kelly received the news in the medical bay, where she was having her crystalline arm examined for the final time. The healing was nearly complete, the fracture sealed, her bioluminescence returning to its natural, powerful intensity. "You must leave," she told James immediately. "Both of us. Now, I'm not a fugitive. You will be." Kelly gripped his shoulders, and her hands trembled. "Commander Chin's actions have already been detected. Her superior officers are arriving in 4 hours to take custody of her and the research. And they will take you as well, because they know about us." James felt his world contract. "What do you want to do?" "I want to take you to my people." Kelly's bioluminescence had shifted to a deep, determined gold. "And I want to prevent a war." The journey across the radioactive wasteland was more brutal in reverse. But this time, they weren't alone. Victoria met them at the designated checkpoint with supplies and coordinates for a hidden Vextheri settlement beyond the reach of human surveillance. "Tell Ava," James started to say. "I will," Victoria promised. "When this is over, I'll tell her everything. And I'll beg her forgiveness, the way you both deserve." She pressed something into Kaya's hand, a data chip containing the bioweapon research, encrypted but intact. Use this to protect your people, Victoria said. And maybe, just maybe, to convince them that not all humans are monsters. Kali's bioluminescence pulsed with something that might have been understanding. She extended her hand, and Victoria took it, a gesture of alliance that would have been unthinkable days before. You are a warrior, Kali said to Victoria. But more importantly, you are a being of conscience. Do not lose that. The hidden settlement existed in the deep caves of Keshin Prime, where the ground itself seemed to glow with residual Vextheri energy. Bioluminescent crystals lined every surface, casting everything in ethereal blues and purples. It was unlike anything James had ever imagined. More than that, it was beautiful. They arrived under cover of darkness, Kali leading James through passages that seemed to shift with their own internal light. When they emerged into the central chamber, hundreds of Vextheri turned to stare at the human in their midst. For a moment, James thought he'd made a terrible mistake. Then Kali stepped forward, and her bioluminescence blazed, a signal of status, of command, of something James didn't fully understand but recognized as important. This is James Holloway, she announced in her native language, which James's translator Necklace converted to English in his ear. He saved my life when I asked him to take it. He chose compassion over victory. He came here not as a spy or a soldier, but as a believer in peace. The gathered Vextheri murmured, their bioluminescence flickering with what might have been doubt or anger or simple shock. Over the following weeks, James learned the complexity of Vextheri society. Kali, he discovered, was more than just a scout. She was a member of the Illuminated Council, a rare honor for someone so young. Her status gave her voice in the settlement's governance, and her love for him gave her power. At night, in the crystalline chamber that had become their private sanctuary, they would lie together in the soft glow of her bioluminescence. James would trace the fractal patterns in her exoskeleton, and Kali would touch the soft, vulnerable skin of his human form, marveling at its smoothness, at the way it flushed with blood and heat. On my world, she whispered against his neck one night, physical intimacy between different castes is death. To love as we love would mean execution. Then we're lucky, James said, pulling her closer, to be building a new world. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies with the kind of patient attention reserved for the sacred. His softness against her crystalline hardness. His warmth against her cool luminescence. When he entered her, it was with a tenderness that transcended species, the universal language of two beings choosing to trust each other completely. After, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, something alien to her but fascinating in its organic reliability. The council debates sending an envoy to Earth, she said quietly. They believe you might help us communicate. Help us understand if peace is truly possible. Is it? James asked. Do you believe it's possible? Kali was silent for a long moment. I believe, she finally said, that you once begged me for death, and I gave you life instead. Anything is possible after that. The video message from Victoria reached them via encrypted satellite relay, smuggled through 3 different proxy servers. In it, Victoria looked directly at the camera, her uniform bearing the insignia of someone operating outside official channels. My name is Commander Victoria Chin. I am a traitor to my government, and I'm also possibly the only human who can help prevent a genocide. She took a breath. The following information contains details of a bioweapon program designed to target the Vextheri species. I am releasing this to the Galactic Council because I believe humanity has made a terrible mistake, and it's time we corrected it. The video included everything, the research, the protocols, the chain of command. It was damning. It was devastating. And it was necessary. There is also something else you need to know, Victoria continued. There is a human among you now. Lieutenant James Holloway. He is not a spy. He's evidence that humans are capable of evolution, of choosing compassion over conquest. Listen to what he has to say. And please, please, believe that not all of my people are monsters. The video ended with Victoria removing her military insignia and laying them on a table in front of her. An act of the most profound rejection of her former life. 48 hours later, Ava Reeves requested political asylum from the Vextheri. She arrived at the settlement with a data chip containing the complete bioweapon research and a letter for Victoria. James watched from the crystalline balcony as Kali met with a newcomer. Ava looked haunted, thinner than in the photographs he'd seen, her eyes marked by the kind of choices that can't be unmade. But when she emerged from the council chamber an hour later, Her eyes held something new purpose. The Galactic Council chambers occupied a space station orbiting Keshen Prime, a neutral ground where humans and Vex theory could meet without the prejudice of either world contaminating the atmosphere. James stood at the center of a council table that seemed impossibly large, facing representatives from 12 different worlds. At his side, a bioluminescence burned steady gold, the color of truth, they told him. Before you, Kali began, her English improved but still carrying the exotic lilt of her native language, is evidence that the human government created a biological weapon intended for genocide against my people. But before you authorize retaliation, I want you to understand something. One human chose mercy when mercy meant nothing to them. One human saved the life of an enemy when ending it would have been celebrated. She extended the data chip containing Ava's research. We have 3 choices, Kali continued. We can use this weapon ourselves, destroying humanity before they destroy us. We can bury this evidence and negotiate a peace that is built on lies. Or we can do something unprecedented. We can forgive. The chamber erupted in discourse, Vex theory clicking and humming in complex patterns, other species responding in their own harmonic languages. A representative from the Thrain Collective, a being whose form James could barely comprehend, stepped forward. Forgiveness, the Thrain said slowly, is weakness. It invites exploitation. No, Victoria's voice came from the chamber's entrance. She stood in full dress uniform, unarmed, accompanied by Ava and 2 other humans who had elected to join them. Forgiveness is the only form of strength that actually changes things. Retaliation only perpetuates cycles. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, creates the possibility of something new. Ava stepped forward, and James saw the moment she locked eyes with Victoria. The room seemed to hold its breath. I spent 6 months developing a weapon, Ava said quietly. Every day, I told myself I was building it for defense. Every night, I knew I was building it because it was easier than examining what I actually believed. I gave that up, not because I was threatened, but because I realized my species was wrong. We can be better. She placed another data chip on the table, parallel to the first. This is every calculation, every algorithm, every component of the bioweapon research. It's yours if you want it. Use it to defend yourselves against those who come after us. But I'm hoping you won't need to. I'm hoping you'll accept instead that at least some humans are choosing a different path. The vote took 3 hours. By the end, the decision was nearly unanimous. Conditional peace. The Vex theory would halt their offensive operations. Humanity would cease bioweapon development and submit to quarterly inspections. Both species would work toward a unified defense against external threats and the establishment of trade and cultural exchange. It wasn't perfect, but it was possible. 6 months later, James and Kali stood on a cliff overlooking the valley where he'd first found her. The radioactive storm had passed. The land was already beginning to heal. I received notification, Kali said, her hand intertwined with his, that your Earth government has formally accepted the peace accords. Victoria Chun has been named ambassador to the Vex Theory Collective. And Ava? James asked, though he already knew the answer. Dr. Reeves requested reassignment to the Scientific Liaison Office. She and Commander Chen had been approved to live together on the neutral station. Kali's bioluminescence shimmered with something that might have been joy. They are rebuilding what they lost. James pulled Kali closer, and she rested her crystalline head against his shoulder in a gesture she'd learned was comforting to him. What about us? He asked. What are we building? Kali was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to face him, and her bioluminescence blazed, not gold for truth, but a brilliant silver that shifted between white and violet. A new world, she said. Not Vex theory. Not human. Something that has never existed before. She produced a small crystalline object, hand-carved with intricate fractal patterns. It was a ring, James realized. She'd made it from her own healing exoskeleton, shaped it with her own hands, inscribed it with symbols he didn't understand but somehow recognized as meaningful. In my culture, there is a bonding ritual, Kali explained. It is typically done between members of the same caste, the same world. Never between species. She extended the ring. I want to be the first. I want to bond with you, James Holloway. Not as human to alien, but as myself to yourself. James took the ring with trembling hands. It was warm, actively warm, pulsing with the residual energy of her bioluminescence. He slipped it onto his finger, and it settled there perfectly, as if it had always been meant to rest there. Then he kissed her. There on that cliff top, watching the twin suns set across an alien sky, with his human lips against her crystalline mouth, they sealed their bond. Behind them, the settlement glowed with gathered bioluminescence, witnesses to history. A human and a Vex theory choosing each other. Choosing peace. Choosing to build something that the old world had deemed impossible. As the stars emerged above them, James thought of the moment he found Kaylee on that radioactive battlefield. She'd begged him for death. Instead, he'd given her life. Now, holding her against his chest, feeling the gentle pulse of her bioluminescent core, he understood that she'd been returning the favor all along. In choosing to save her, he'd saved himself.